He built an empire of lies to destroy me, but I played my own father's game to trap him. Can you imagine spending your entire life believing your own mother abandoned you, only to discover she didn't abandon you at all? She escaped. And the man who kept her caged, the man who claimed to love me more than anyone, spent 8 years systematically destroying every single connection I ever tried to make. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. For as long as I can remember, my dad had this excuse. This story he clung to like a lifeline. He'd say, "Your mom abandoned me, son. She just walked out when you were 11, cold and selfish. She threw everything away." And because of that, he felt entitled to make sure no one, and I mean no one, ever got close enough to leave me the way she supposedly left him. This wasn't some concerned dad checking in. This was an 8-year campaign of psychological warfare. Every friendship, every crush, every single person who ever looked at me like I mattered, he systematically dismantled them. He took them apart with the terrifying patience of a bomb diffuser. And the great tragedy that justified all this? My mother did pack 2 suitcases one Sunday morning and drove away when I was 11. That part was true. But the story he spun? That she was some heartless woman who didn't care about her own child? I believed it. God, I believed it for most of my life, because it was the only version I was ever allowed to hear. But you know how it is. There's always a piece of the story someone leaves out. And the piece he left out? She didn't abandon us. She escaped. She left after 6 years of him monitoring her every move, reading her texts, timing her grocery runs, accusing her of imaginary affairs, digging through her car for receipts, even calling her friends to tell them she was unwell. Until one by one, those friends vanished. Her entire world, her entire sense of self, shrank down to the size of our house and the man who controlled it. She didn't run from her family. She ran from a cage. And the cruelest part, the part that makes my stomach churn even now, is that she tried to take me with her. She fought for me. She wanted me. But by the time she left, my father had already spent years building a meticulous, poisonous case against her. The same way he'd later build cases against everyone I loved. He fabricated things, documented events that never happened. He even engineered moments to make her snap, recording her at her absolute worst. Then he presented all of it to a family court, playing the wounded, devoted father just trying to protect his son. And it worked. It always worked. His greatest talent, his genuine gift, was making the truth look like a lie and himself look like the only honest man in the room. So he got full custody. My mom got supervised visitation based on evidence he manufactured. Even that fell apart. Missed appointments she swore she never missed. Messages she never received. False tips to mandated reporters. Eventually, she was painted as so unstable, so dangerous, that seeing me became impossible. She was forced to make the unthinkable choice. Stop fighting a war she couldn't win, just to survive, hoping that someday, when I was grown, I'd come looking for her and understand. And I did grow up, believing she was the villain, the woman who didn't want me. While the actual villain, the architect of all this misery, tucked me into bed every night and whispered, "I'm the only one who will never leave you." And God help me, I believed every damn word for years. The pattern, the true nature of his sickness, didn't fully reveal itself until I started dating. That's when I saw the second half of his condition. It wasn't enough to drive my mother away. He couldn't stand the idea of me having what he had lost. He couldn't tolerate watching me be happy with someone. Every girl I brought home, with their dark hair, their easy laugh, the way a good partner makes you feel lighter, they were all reminders of her. And every time he saw that lightness in me, something inside him curdled. And he went to work. It always started small, didn't it? Freshman year of high school. Her name was Maya. She had this laugh that made me feel like the funniest guy alive. We'd only been together maybe 2 months, still in that honeymoon haze, when my father started his campaign. At first, it was just concern. "Son," he'd say, "I saw Maya talking to some older guy at the mall. They looked pretty friendly. Are you sure she's being straight with you?" I'd defend her, of course. "Dad, she has a lot of friends." And he'd nod. Of course, of course. I just want you to have your eyes open. A father's job is to help his son see clearly. I didn't think anything of it. That's what fathers say, right? Then, a week later, it escalated. He sat me down at the kitchen table, his phone in his hand, a heavy, sorrowful expression on his face, like showing me this was killing him. On the screen were messages May had supposedly sent to a friend. Messages calling me clingy, boring, pathetic, saying she was only with me out of pity. My stomach just dropped. Where did you get these? I whispered. He said, her friend's older brother goes to my gym. He saw them and thought you deserved to know. People show you who they are, son. You just have to be willing to look. I was 15. My father had never lied to me before. Not that I knew. So I believed the screenshots over the girl who made me laugh. I confronted May. She went pale, then started crying. I never wrote these. Someone is making this up. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But my dad's evidence was right there, her name, her profile picture, timestamps. When it's your dad's word against a 2-month relationship, and you're 15, you pick your dad. I broke up with her. She stood there, tears streaming, saying, "You're going to realize this was a mistake." I walked away feeling like the biggest fool for trusting her. A full year later, Maya found me by the lockers. We'd both grown up a bit. She said, "I need to tell you something that's been bothering me for a year." She told me that after we broke up, my father called her mom, claiming I had anger issues, that I'd frightened her, and her mom needed to keep her safe from me. My mom was terrified, Maya said. She wouldn't let me anywhere near you, even if I'd wanted to try again. Then she looked at me. I never wrote those messages, and I think you know that now. She was right. A splinter of doubt had formed. I was starting to know it, but I still couldn't quite understand it. Then came Zoe, sophomore year. Zoe was the first girl who made me feel like I was worth something. Not just funny, but genuinely valuable. She was quiet, sharp, saw right through people, and saw through me in the best possible way. We lasted almost 5 months, a record for me. But here's the thing about Zoe, the thing I didn't grasp at the time. She looked like my mother. Not exactly, but enough. The same dark hair, the same way she tilted her head when she listened. The first time I brought her home, my father actually flinched. I saw it. A full-body flinch, like he'd been touched by something cold. Then he plastered on a smile, shook her hand, and said, "Any friend of my son's?" Zoe told me later she felt something off about him. "Your dad watches people," she said, "the way a cat watches a bird." I laughed it off. He started slow with her, just like always. Little comments. "She seems like the type who's used to getting her way, son. Be careful. Girls like that see boys like you as a soft place to land." I defended her, of course. He backed off. Okay. I trust your judgment." And I thought that was the end of it. But my father never backs off. He just goes quiet and works underground. About a month later, Zoe just stopped answering my texts. One day we were fine, the next silence. When I finally got her on the phone, she wasn't sad. She was furious. "Why would you tell everyone I was cheating on you?" she demanded. "What? I never said that to anyone," I swore. 3 separate people in my friend group got messages from some anonymous account, no name, no photo, laying out this whole story that I'd been seeing someone behind your back, with screenshots and dates and everything. Now everyone's looking at me like I'm garbage. I was desperate. "Zoe, I swear on my life I didn't send those." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Even if you didn't, and I'm not sure I believe that, even if you didn't, I can't be with someone whose life comes with this much poison in it. There's something wrong in your world, and I don't want it in mine." She hung up, blocked me on everything. I sat in my room and cried for a week. And my father? He made me my favorite dinner, sat across from me and said, "You deserve so much better than a girl who'd believe rumors over you, son. A real partner would never let other people turn her against you." I remember thinking, through my tears, how lucky I was to have a father so completely and permanently in my corner. It makes me sick now to remember it. He was watching me grieve a wound he had opened. He was comforting me for a murder he'd committed, and he was enjoying it.
He was feeding on it.
By junior year, the splinters had become something I could almost see whole. Heartbreak followed a schedule in my life. Every time I got close to someone, the ground would shift beneath us in ways that felt engineered. But I couldn't prove anything. And worse, every time I tried to say it out loud, it sounded insane. My own father is secretly destroying my relationships.
Who says that?
Who would ever believe that? I tried once. I went to my school counselor, a well-meaning woman with a soothing voice and a box of tissues. I tried to explain it. I watched her face arrange itself into an expression of gentle pity halfway through. When I finished, she said, "It sounds like you might be looking for someone to blame for what is honestly a pretty normal amount of teenage heartbreak. Relationships at your age just don't tend to last. And that's painful, but it's not a conspiracy." Then she said the thing that ended it for me. "Maybe it would help to bring your dad in for a session. We could talk together about these feelings of persecution you're having. He clearly cares about you a lot. He calls the front office to check on you more than almost any parent I know." I felt the trap close. Because of course he did. Of course he'd already made himself known to the one adult I might have turned to as the concerned, devoted father, so that if I ever came to her sounding paranoid, she'd already have the perfect frame to fit me into. I never went back to her office. I understood then that there was no adult in my life he hadn't already reached. He'd spent years quietly building his reputation as Father of the Year, precisely so that no one would ever believe me. Then came Layla, and I decided this one. Layla I was going to protect. I met her the summer before senior year, at a job 2 towns over. A garden center where we spent the season hauling soil and watering plants. She had a laugh like Maya's, eyes like Zoe's, and a way of making me feel completely like myself. I looked at her and thought, not this one. I'm not going to let him have this one. So, I did everything right. I told her almost nothing about my dad. I never posted about her, not a single photo. I bought a cheap second phone, a burner, just for talking to her, so nothing would show up on the family plan. I met her only in that other town, never in mine. I kept her like a secret garden, carefully hidden. For 4 months, it worked. For months of being happy in a way I'd forgotten was possible. The happiest 4 months of my life. I let myself believe I'd finally found the crack in the wall, the way to have something my father couldn't reach. But the thing about being watched your whole life is you get so used to hiding, you forget how one small thing can undo everything. And my one small thing was a receipt. I took Layla to a nice restaurant for our 4-month anniversary, a real place with cloth napkins. I paid in cash to keep it off any record. But I kept the receipt like a keepsake because I was 17 and in love. It sat in the cup holder of my car, and my father found it. He didn't say anything at first. That's not how he works. He doesn't confront, he circles. I noticed him watching me more closely. I noticed him finding reasons to borrow my car. I noticed a stillness in him, a terrifying focus. Then, one evening, he sat me down with that same sorrowful, loving expression. "Son," he said, "I think you're seeing someone, and I think you're hiding her from me. And I want you to know I'm not angry. I understand why you might feel like you need to keep secrets, but I also think part of you is hiding her because part of you already knows, deep down, that she's not right for you. And whatever happens, I need you to know that I am always, always going to be here for you." I should have run. I should have taken Layla and run. But instead, I looked into my father's kind, concerned, lying eyes, and I let him believe he'd imagined it. "There's no one, Dad. You know I'm not dating anyone." And he smiled and said, "Okay, son. I believe you." Neither of us believed the other. 2 weeks later, my second phone rang while I was at work. It was Layla. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "A man came to my house today, an investigator," she choked out. "He said he had a folder about you. He showed my parents' documents. A juvenile record with your name on it. Complaints from girls. Restraining orders. He said you had a history of stalking, that you'd hurt people. My dad read the whole thing, and now he says I can never see you again. He says you're dangerous." She cried. I tried to tell him it wasn't true, but He wouldn't listen. Between sobs, she whispered, I believe you. I do. But they're my parents, and I have to live here. Layla, I said, my voice shaking. None of that is real. There's no record. None of it exists. Someone made it, she said. I know. But how do I prove that to them? And that was the genius of it. That was always the genius of it. The burden of proof was never on him. It was on us. On 17-year-old kids trying to convince their parents that a professional-looking folder full of official-looking documents was an elaborate forgery. And we couldn't do it. Layla fought for me for weeks, but her family had that fake record. Every argument came back to it. Do you really want to throw away your future on a boy with a history like that? Slowly, over weeks, the constant pressure of choosing between her whole family and a boy she'd known for a season wore her down. Until one day she called me. She wasn't crying anymore. She just sounded tired. I'm so sorry. I can't keep fighting all of them. I can't. And she was gone, too. That night, alone in my room, I finally understood the entire shape of my life. My father was never going to stop. This wasn't going to end when I graduated or moved out or turned 30. He was going to do this for the rest of my life. Every single person I ever dared to love, he would find them, he would study them, and he would take them apart, piece by patient piece. Because in the story he told himself, he was a hero. He was saving his son from the abandonment that had destroyed him. He was making sure I'd never feel what he felt when my mother's car pulled out of the driveway. But that was a lie he told himself. The truth was simpler, uglier. He could not bear for me to have what he had lost. He needed me to be exactly as alone as he was, because my loneliness was the only thing that made his loneliness make sense. And I made a decision that night. I stopped fighting him. I stopped fighting him where he could see it. I went still. I became the perfect son. A week later, I went to him and told him, with tears that felt real because half of them were, that he'd been right all along. That I clearly wasn't ready for relationships, that they just brought chaos into my life. That all I wanted was to focus on school, and on us. I watched something move across his face. And it wasn't love. It was triumph. It was the deep, satisfied calm of a man who'd finally gotten what he wanted. And in that moment, watching him savor my surrender, I hated him more completely than I had ever hated anything. And I made myself a promise. Someday, I would take from him the one thing he treasured most. I didn't fully know yet what that was. But I knew I would find it. But I was 17. I had nothing. No money, no leverage, no proof. And he held every single card. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I waited. I played the long game. I learned to smile at the man who'd stolen my life. I learned to be grateful to him in public. I learned to lie the way he lied, smoothly and completely. And I banked every ounce of rage I had. And I let 2 years go by. Fast forward to when I finally turned 19. I got accepted to a community college 40 minutes away. Moved into a cheap apartment with 2 roommates. Got just enough distance between me and my father to finally breathe, finally think, and finally plan. Because there was one detail, one thread, I had been holding on to since I was 14. The answer to a question I'd never stopped asking. How? How is my father so good at this? How does he always have the exact right forgery, the exact right rumor, the exact right lie for every situation? Where does a man who sells insurance for a living learn to destroy people with the precision of a surgeon? The answer was, he didn't learn it on his own. He had help. My father had a therapist. Except, she wasn't really a therapist. Not in the way you think. He called her his life strategist, Dr. Elder. He'd been seeing her since before my mother left. And after my mother was gone, he started bringing me along to what he called family sessions. I would sit in that office on a stiff leather chair while a woman with silver hair and cold, clever eyes coached my father on how to handle me. And that was the word she used. Handle. Sometimes manage. Even when I was 14, sitting right there, she'd talk about me in the third person like I was a project, a problem to be solved. She'd say to him, "The boy is testing boundaries again. You'll need to reestablish the hierarchy." And once, when I mentioned a girl I liked at school, I watched Dr. Elder's eyes flicked to my father, and she said, very calmly, it might be time to remove that particular source of instability. 2 weeks later, that girl wouldn't look at me anymore. I was 14. I filed it away, without understanding it. And there were other things about Dr. Elder that were wrong, even to a kid. The diplomas on her wall were from schools I could never find when I searched them later. The office was always cash only. There was a little box in her desk drawer she'd tuck the bills into. She looked at me sometimes with this appraising expression, like a jeweler examining a stone, deciding what it was worth. And I always left her office feeling like something had been taken from me that I couldn't name. It took me until I was 19 to finally be able to name it. She was the architect. She was the source.
Dr.
Elder was the one teaching my father the entire playbook, the forged screenshots, the anonymous tips, the fake investigator, the manufactured records, the slow, patient isolation. Every weapon he had ever used against my mother, and against May and Zoe and Layla, and against girls I'd liked whose names I never even got to learn. All of it traced back to that cash-only office and the woman with the cold, clever eyes. And now I was 19, and I could finally do something about it. So I started with research, and research is where I discovered the crack in the whole thing. It took me 3 weeks of digging through court records, state licensing databases, and old newspaper archives to establish a single, beautiful fact. Dr. Elder did not have a license to practice therapy in our state. She never had. She'd held one once, years ago, in a state 2 time zones away. And it had been revoked. Revoked for the exact thing she was still doing: boundary violations, exploiting people who came to her for help, practicing manipulation dressed up in the language of healing. When her license was pulled, she hadn't stopped. She'd simply packed up, moved states, changed the name on her door from therapist to strategist, and kept right on going, seeing a roster of clients who paid cash and asked no questions. Clients like my father.
Dozens of them.
And the moment I understood that Dr. Elder was operating a criminal enterprise, a fraud, a fake, with no license and no oversight, and a filing cabinet full of the ruined lives she'd helped ruin, the whole plan assembled itself in my mind, fully formed. I would become her client. I would walk into that office under a name that wasn't mine. And I would let her coach me the exact same way she'd coached my father for years. I would present her with a problem and let her teach me how to solve it with forgery and fraud. And I would record every single second of it. I would gather enough of her own words, in her own voice, to bury her. And here was the elegant part, the part that made it perfect. When Dr. Elder went down, my father went down with her. Because everything my father did required her. He was not the mastermind. He was a client. He was a customer of her services. And without her scripts, her tools, her forgery service, my father was just a sad, broken man who'd been outsourcing his cruelty to a professional. If I could dismantle the professional, I could expose the customer. I booked the appointment using the name Liam. It was a Tuesday, and my father believed I was at a night class. I paid the deposit in cash at a check cashing place, so there would be no card statement, no digital breadcrumb, nothing to find. The receptionist, if you could even call her that, was a bored middle-aged woman at a folding table in the corner of the waiting room who took my cash without counting it and handed me a clipboard of intake forms. I filled them out with a steady hand because I had been rehearsing this appointment in my head for 2 years. I built a fictional history, a young man being manipulated by a controlling partner, a partner who reminded me of a mother who had hurt me and left. And I salted the whole thing with phrases I had heard Dr. Elder herself use across all those years of family sessions. I wrote about feeling like I was losing control of my own life. I wrote about needing to regain the upper hand. I wrote in the exact register I knew she'd respond to. The waiting room smelled like cold coffee and a floral air freshener that couldn't quite cover something underneath it. While I waited, I watched a man in his 40s come out of her office, looking like something had been scooped out of him. He was holding a manila folder. Through the gap, I could see the edges of what looked like printed screenshots. And I understood in that moment that I was not the first person to sit in this waiting room planning to destroy someone. I was just the first one planning to destroy her. When the receptionist called Liam, Dr. Elder opened her office door herself. She looked at me with that same old appraising expression, the jeweler examining the stone. My heart stopped for 1 second because I was sure she'd know me. But she didn't. I had grown up. I'd been 14 the last time she really looked at me, a quiet, soft, skinny kid who sat in the corner. Now I was 19. I'd spent 2 years in a gym turning my rage into something with shoulders. I'd changed my hair. I carried myself differently. I was a stranger named Ethan. And she smiled. The practiced, warm smile of a predator who'd spotted something promising. She said, "Come in, Ethan. Let's talk." Her office had not changed in 5 years. The same leather chairs, the same wall of diplomas from schools that don't exist, the same desk with the same drawer where I knew the cash box lived. I sat down in the client chair, the one my father used to sit in while she coached him on how to break me. I made sure my phone was angled just right in the breast pocket of my shirt, recording clean, clear audio. She folded her hands and said, "So, Ethan, what brings you to me today?" I let my voice tremble just slightly, not too much, just enough. "It's my girlfriend," I said. "She's controlling every part of my life, and I don't know how to make it stop." I watched Dr. Elder's eyes sharpen with interest. This was her favorite kind of problem, the kind she could take apart. "Tell me about her," she said. I gave her a story I had built out of the ruins of my own life. I described a partner who reminded me of someone who'd abandoned me, who made me feel small, who needed to be taught that she couldn't control me.
Dr.
Elder nodded slowly through all of it. Then she said something that made the hair stand up on my arms. "Ethan, I want to reframe something for you. The goal here isn't to fix this relationship. The goal is to reestablish your control over your own life." She leaned forward. "And sometimes the single healthiest thing a person can do is remove a destabilizing individual from their life entirely. And there are ways to do that. Clean ways. Ways that don't leave your fingerprints anywhere." "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled. "We'll get to specific techniques over time. But the first thing we need to do, the foundation of all of it, is to build your case." There it was, that word again. Case. The exact word my father used. She told me to start keeping a file. To document everything my girlfriend did, every slight, every argument. And then she said, "And here's the important part. If the file isn't compelling enough on its own, there are ways to help it along." She said that phrase, "help it along," with the casual ease of a woman ordering lunch. She scheduled me for twice-weekly sessions. As I stood to leave, she put her hand on my shoulder and let it linger a beat too long. "You're a smart young man, Ethan. You're taking control. Most people don't have the strength for what you're about to do." I walked out to my car and sat behind the wheel, shaking. Not with fear, but with a fierce, electric joy. Because I had her. I had her in the very first session, admitting the entire philosophy of the thing on tape. But a philosophy wasn't enough. I needed the mechanics, the forgery service, the fake tips, the network of ruined lives. I needed her to walk me through the actual weapons. So I kept going. And the entire time, I had to make sure that my father, the man who had surveilled me my whole life, never suspected that I was moving against him. Because the one absolute law of my father was that he always moved first. The trouble started about 3 weeks in. My father began to sense a change in me. Nothing I said, just a difference in my weather. He'd always been able to read me like that. He started driving out to my apartment unannounced with bags of groceries, a gesture that looked like love and was actually an inspection. He'd walk through my rooms while he put the food away, noting things. One evening, he was standing in my kitchen when my real phone buzzed on the counter with a text from Dr. Elder's office confirming my Thursday appointment. My father saw the screen light up. I saw him see it, and something in his posture shifted, the way a hunter shifts when a branch moves. "Who's texting you, son?" he said lightly. "Just my study group," I replied. He smiled. "You know, I only ask because I love you. I worry about you out here on your own." "I know, Dad," I said. He finished putting the groceries away and hugged me on his way out. He held on a half-second too long the way Dr. Elder had. And I knew the clock had started. 3 days later, he called me. Mentioned, oh so casually, that he'd moved me onto his phone plan to save me money. What a generous father. And by the way, he could see my location now on the app, just for safety, of course.
Just so he'd know I was okay.
My blood ran cold.
Dr.
Elder's office was not a place a study group would ever meet. And now my father could see exactly where I went. So that same afternoon, I drove to a big box store and bought a burner phone with cash. A second secret phone, just like the one I'd once used for Layla. I built a system. I would leave my real phone at home or at the campus library, where a study group plausibly met. And I would carry the burner to my sessions. And I would text my father from the burner, from believable locations, at believable times. My father was brilliant at this game. But I had a lifetime of studying him. He taught me every move he had by using them on me. The next session, Dr. Elder got specific. It was worse and better than I'd imagined. She pulled a laptop onto her desk and turned it toward me. She showed me a service she used, a website where, for a fee, you could generate screenshots of text conversations that never happened. Down to the read receipts, the typing bubbles, the little timestamps that make a fake feel real. She walked me through it like a tutorial. See, Ethan, she said, the mistake amateurs make is that their forgeries are too clean, too convenient. You want a little mess, a typo, a mundane detail. It's the imperfections that make people believe. I nodded and took mental notes. Every word went onto my recording. Then she showed me the second tool, the rumor engine. She called it a method for seeding a story through anonymous accounts across a target's social circle in a way that couldn't be traced back. The beauty of it is the timing, she said. You release it to 3 or 4 people at once, and by the time your target even realizes what's happening and tries to defend herself, everyone's already decided she's guilty. Defense reads as guilt. That's the whole trick. I said quietly, have you done this for a lot of people?
Dr.
Elder leaned back in her chair with a small, proud smile. More than you would ever guess. Then she said the thing that opened the whole world up. You'd be amazed how many parents come to me about their children's relationships. I went very still. Parents? I asked. Oh, yes, she replied. Like a mother worried her kids dating the wrong person? I pressed.
Dr.
Elder waved a hand. Mothers, fathers, grandparents, it makes no difference. The underlying dynamic is always identical. Someone cannot tolerate losing control over a person they've come to think of as an extension of themselves, a possession. And my job is to give them the tools to reassert that control. She said it with the detached pride of a craftsman describing her trade. I had to hold my face very still, because there it was. The network.
Dr.
Elder wasn't just my father's enabler. She had built an entire business, a whole practice around teaching controlling people how to systematically destroy the relationships of the very people they claim to love the most. My father was one client in a filing cabinet full of them. And I realized that if I did this right, I wasn't just going to free myself. I was going to blow the whole thing open for all of them. I needed more than her voice, though. Her admissions were gold. But a defense attorney could argue context. Could argue I'd let her on. I needed the physical evidence, the client list, the payment records, the forgery templates, the actual files. So I changed my strategy. I stopped presenting as a desperate client and started presenting as an admirer, a would-be protege. I told Dr. Elder that I was fascinated by her work, that I wanted to understand how she'd built something so successful, that maybe someday I wanted to do what she did. And predators love an apprentice. They love an audience that reflects them back bigger than they are. And she opened up. She told me she kept all her records on a single external drive that she took home with her every night for security. She told me she never used her real revoked license number for anything. She told me she'd been running this practice for 15 years across 3 different states. Always one step ahead, always cash. Always careful. Meanwhile, my father was closing in. He'd figured out that my location data didn't add up. That might have sat frozen at the library for 6 and 7 hours at a stretch, which no real person does. He showed up at my apartment one night, holding his phone with the map open. And he said, in that soft, dangerous voice. "You weren't at the library, son. I've watched your location sit in that building for 6 hours, 3 times this week. Nobody studies for 6 hours. Where were you?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I turn my phone off when I study, Dad. You know I've always done that. I leave it in my bag. I can't focus with it buzzing." He stared at me for a long, cold moment, weighing me. I held his gaze and let a little hurt into my voice. "I thought you trusted me." And that hurt was the right move because it made him the accuser. It made him the paranoid one. He softened just slightly. "Of course, I trust you. I just worry." And I said, "I know, Dad. It's just me and you out here."
He left.
And in my rearview mirror, I watched him sit in his car outside my building for 20 minutes before he drove away. I knew he'd started digging. So I accelerated everything. Around this time, I finally did the thing I had been too afraid to do for 8 years. I found my mother. It wasn't even hard, once I was an adult who could look without my father watching over my shoulder. Her name was different now. She'd remarried a few years back. She lived 4 hours north in a town I'd never been to. I sat in my car for an hour, holding the burner before I could make myself dial. When she answered, I couldn't speak. Then I said, "Mom, it's me." There was a silence, so total, I thought the call had dropped. And then I heard a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. The sound of a woman who had spent 8 years believing she had lost her only child forever, hearing his voice again. She drove down that same night, 4 hours through the dark. We met at a diner off the highway at midnight. She was older than the woman in the few photos I'd managed to hide from my father over the years. But her eyes were the same. She reached across the table and held my hands. She told me everything. The surveillance, the accusations, the false reports, the way my father had turned the courts and the counselors and every mutual friend against her. How she'd fought for years to see me and been painted as an unstable danger to her own son. How she'd finally had to choose between destroying herself in an unwinnable war and surviving in the hope that I'd come find her. And then she said the thing that finally broke something loose in my chest. She said, "I never abandoned you. Not for one single second. I was pushed out inch by a man who wanted me erased. And I have thought about you every single day for 8 years." I believed her instantly and completely, because I finally understood the machine that had done it to her. I'd spent my whole life inside it. So I told her everything too, about May and Zoe and Layla and the counselor who wouldn't listen and about Dr. Elder and the plan and the recordings. My mother listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My husband, David, knows a lawyer. A woman who handles exactly this kind of thing. Fraud, unlicensed practice, financial crimes." My mother squeezed my hands. "We will help you, but you have to promise me you'll be careful, because I know your father better than anyone alive. And I'm telling you, when that man is cornered, he doesn't get frightened. He gets vicious. And he's cleverest right when he's most afraid." The weekend at Dr. Elder's home office arrived. She'd offered to meet me there because, she said, her main office was being fumigated. But really, I think she'd started to see me as inside the circle as one of hers. I wore a jacket with a second phone sewn into the lining, recording video this time, not just audio. She welcomed me into a house that was far too nice for a legitimate small practice. She poured me tea. And then, because I'd spent weeks flattering her, because she wanted to impress her promising young protege, she showed me her case files. She pulled open a drawer, and there were dozens of them. Each one a manila folder. Each one a human being whose life had been quietly demolished by a parent or a spouse, or an ex who had paid this woman to teach them how. She showed me a few with the names redacted, proud of her craftsmanship, walking me through how she'd handled each one. And even redacted, I could see the shape of the horror. The same techniques over and over. The forgeries, the rumors, the fake investigators, the patient isolation. At one point, I saw a detail on one file, a specific town, a specific set of initials that I would remember and be able to hand to a lawyer. While she was out of the room making more tea, I saw it. The external drive. sitting right there on her desk. The drive with everything on it. I wanted to grab it so badly my hands ached, but I didn't. Taking it would tip her off, would end everything. So instead, I photographed the label, the make, the model, the little asset tag she'd stuck on it. I sent those photos to my mother's lawyer, who wrote back within the hour and said, "This is perfect. This is exactly what a judge needs to sign a warrant if we can get the police to move." And getting the police to move was the whole question, because manipulation and forgery and cruelty are hard to prosecute. They live in a gray space. But here was the thing. My father, in his arrogance, had once handed me the key to all of it without meaning to. Years ago, he told me, almost admiringly, that Dr. Elder kept insurance, that she secretly recorded her own clients confessing their plans, their intentions, so that no client could ever turn on her. Because if any of them tried, she could expose them. She had them all on tape. I remembered thinking as a kid that it was smart. And now I understood what it actually meant. It meant that my father, the man who had spent my whole life making sure his cruelty could never be traced to him, was on those recordings. In his own voice. Admitting everything he'd done. Every relationship he destroyed. And if I could get the police to seize that drive, my father would be handing himself over, in his own confident, unmistakable voice. So, we built the complaint carefully. My mother's lawyer was a sharp, patient woman who'd handled fraud cases for 2 decades. She said the recordings of Dr. Elder admitting she practiced without a license were the anchor. Unlicensed practice is a clean, chargeable crime. And from there, we could pull the whole thread. We had my audio of her admitting she manufactured false evidence for money. We had the identified victims from the files, 2 of whom the lawyer quietly reached out to, and who agreed to talk once they understood they were not alone. Once they understood there was a whole filing cabinet of people like them. We had the payment patterns. Cash, yes, but cash deposited in rhythms a forensic accountant could map. And then we caught the break that made the police truly care. Because it turned out Dr. Elder, in addition to the cash clients, had also been billing a few clients' medical insurance for therapy sessions, using a borrowed license number that belonged to a real, licensed therapist 3 states away who had no idea her credentials were being used. And insurance fraud with a stolen professional identity is exactly the kind of concrete, traceable crime that makes a detective in the financial crimes unit sit up straight and start filling out paperwork. Meanwhile, my father could feel the web trembling, even if he couldn't see the spider. He started calling me 2, 3 times a day. He showed up at my campus once, just to see my face. He was a man who'd spent his whole life in perfect control, and he could feel that control slipping, and he did not know why. And then he did the thing I had been quietly praying he would do. The thing that finished him completely. In his rising panic that I was somehow slipping out of his grasp, my father went to Dr. Elder for an emergency session to strategize about how to bring me back under control. And he did this 2 days before the police executed the search warrant on Dr. Elder's home. So, when the detective seized that external drive and the forensic team began working through 15 years of recordings, the single most recent file, the freshest confession on the entire drive, was my father's voice from 48 hours earlier, saying, "I think my son is planning something against me. I can feel it. I need to get ahead of it before he can act. What's the fastest way to discredit him if he tries to come after me? I need to build a file on him the way we built the files on those girls. I need people to think he's unstable so that nothing he says can touch me." And Dr. Elder's voice answering, calm and professional, walking my father step by step through how to destroy his own son's credibility, how to plant the idea that I was mentally ill, how to forge a paper trail, how to make certain that no one would ever believe a single word I said. The exact playbook they'd run on my mother. The exact playbook they'd run on May and Zoe and Layla. All of it laid out in their own 2 voices, with a timestamp from 2 days before the raid. The detective told me later that in 15 years of working fraud, he had almost never seen a case hand itself over so completely, so cleanly, gift-wrapped by the arrogance of the people committing it. Dr. Elder was arrested on a Tuesday morning. I found out later that she'd smiled at the officers at first, certain it was a misunderstanding, certain her cleverness would carry her the way it always had. She was charged with practicing psychology without a license, with insurance fraud, with identity fraud for the stolen credentials, and with multiple counts of fraud tied to the manufactured evidence she'd sold. When the forensic team finished with the drive, they had the client list, the payment ledgers, the forgery templates, and 15 years of recorded confessions. The whole network came apart at once, because half of her clients had incriminated themselves on tape as her insurance. And that insurance became the state's evidence against every one of them. My father was arrested 3 days later. The forged messages he had used to destroy my relationships going back years were sitting on Dr. Elder's drive with metadata tying them to sessions he had personally paid for. The anonymous accounts that had spread the rumors about Zoe traced back through Vance's rumor service to invoices with my father's payments. The fake investigator who had gone to Layla's parents with a fabricated juvenile record turned out to be a man Dr. Elder subcontracted for exactly that kind of job. And when the police came for him, he did what men like that always do the moment there's no more money and loyalty. He flipped instantly and completely. And he named every client who had ever hired him. And near the top of his list was my father. Maya came forward when my mother's lawyer contacted her.
She was in college now.
She cried on the phone and said, "I knew it. I always knew something was wrong." Zoe came forward, too, and gave a statement about the anonymous rumor campaign that had turned her whole friend group against her at 16. And Layla's parents, when they were finally shown the forensic report proving that the juvenile record they'd been handed was a complete fabrication, called me. And Layla's father, a man who had looked at me like I was a threat to his daughter's future, wept and apologized. I let him. I told him it was okay. And their apology meant far less than I once imagined it would, because by then, I had already stopped needing it. The trial, when it came, was almost anticlimactic because the evidence was so total. But there was one moment I will keep forever. My father's lawyer stood up and made the argument I had feared my entire life. The argument that my father was himself a grieving, damaged victim. A man broken by abandonment who had been preyed upon and manipulated by a predatory, unlicensed therapist. That he was as much a victim of Dr. Elder as anyone. That he'd only wanted to protect his son and had been led astray. And for about 10 minutes as that lawyer spoke, I felt the old childhood terror rise up in me. The certainty that my father would talk his way out of this. The way he had talked his way into custody and out of accountability for my entire life. The way he always won. But then the prosecutor stood up and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to play a recording." And she played the file from 2 days before the raid. My father's voice filling that silent courtroom, asking a woman to help him build a false case against his own child. To have me declared unstable. To make sure no one would ever believe me. The courtroom went absolutely still. And I watched the jury's faces change one by one. I watched them stop seeing a grieving father and start seeing what I had spent 8 years unable to make anyone see. And my father turned around in his seat and found me in the gallery. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw his face without the mask on it. No devoted father, no wounded widower, no wise, concerned dad. Just a small, frightened, hollow man who had spent 2 decades making certain that no one he claimed to love could ever once be free of him. And he mouthed 3 words at me across that courtroom. "How could you?" And I finally understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that he would never, in his entire life, understand that he had done every bit of this to himself.
Dr.
Elder took a plea, 8 years in prison, and a permanent bar from ever holding any counseling or advisory role again. The civil suits from her exposed clients will follow her for the rest of her life. My father was convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud and multiple counts of stalking and harassment, built from years of forged evidence and anonymous campaigns and the sworn testimony of 3 young women whose lives he had quietly taken apart. At his sentencing, the judge, a woman who had listened to all of it without expression, looked down at my father and said, "The cruelty in this case was never loud. It was patient and methodical, and it wore the mask of love. And that, in my experience, is the hardest kind of cruelty to forgive." She sentenced him to 6 years. As they prepared to lead him out, My father looked at me one final time. He said, in a voice loud enough for the whole room to hear, "You're just like me now, aren't you? You destroyed my life for revenge. How does that feel?" I stood up in that gallery, my mother's hand held tight in mine. The mother I'd been told my whole life had abandoned me, standing right there beside me because she never had. And I looked at the man who had stolen 8 years from both of us and I said, "No, Dad. I'm nothing like you. I didn't destroy a life. I gave 3 people back the truth. And I gave my mother back her son. And I gave myself back my future." And then I turned around. I walked out of that courtroom and out through the heavy doors into a parking lot flooded with afternoon sun. My mother came out beside me, and for the first time in 8 years, the sun on my face felt like it belonged to me. If this story touched your heart, support us by sharing it, and don't forget to subscribe to Tales Storybook for more emotional journeys.